The next question is a bit more focused in that it relates particularly to the hospitality industry. Global recession travelers are fewer in number and much more cost conscious at a time when the high cost of doing business in the hospitality industry, especially the cost of utilities and food, makes it difficult for BVI businesses to offer competitive prices that are essential in this environment. What does your party propose to do to provide assistance and/or direction to the industry, that is, to the hospitality industry? What do you propose to do to provide assistance or direction to the hospitality industry? And we're going to start next with Mr. Maduro. So, you're first up. How are you going to help the industry?
Well, first of all, when we begin a thing, it grows. And in growing, we keep check on how it grows. So in such cases, you have to rely a lot on data, what your experience from day to day. And this is what the politicians rely on from the different government departments and so on, so that by using these data as indication, we will know exactly where to go. As it stands right now in the hospitality business, we would have to have the complaints from those who run such institution so that we know exactly what correction we have to make. As it stands right now, I don't have it in my hand. And that's the way I would start from, find out what our problems are in the area, and then try and have it corrected.
Thank you. Mr. Natalio Wheatley.
Yeah, well, a lot of these, a lot of the solutions have already been mentioned, and they're not specifically just for the hospitality industry, but we were already speaking about a policy and being business friendly. And we need policies and being business friendly for our local people, as I said before, who are already in business. The same incentives that you're giving to big hotels, whether it's Oil Nut Bay or Scrub Island or any other hotels, should be available for the local people as well. The hospitality industry, as far as I know, needs more customers. They need more tourists to come to our shores, and we spoke about how we could get more tourists to the shores. The hospitality industry would benefit greatly by some of the improvements in our infrastructure that we spoke about already, improving airlift and improving the roads and the sewage problems. These are things that were already mentioned, and also the investment to expand our businesses and offer services at a higher level that could happen through a strong national bank and a strong business bureau.
Thank you. Mr. Alan Wheatley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Well, a couple of things that we have to look at, excuse me, when we're looking at the whole issue of the hospitality industry. I think we were on the right track when, first of all, when we started on education with the Culinary Arts Center program, culinary program, vis-a-vis looking at the Culinary Arts Center. I think that's still, if we're very serious about tourism, we're going to have to push that one project forward, if none else, because we really need to improve the quality of the personnel in the industry. Once you've done that, more efficiency by way in which these businesses operate will do a lot in terms of the whole issue of the attractiveness of the businesses. In terms of direct benefit to the businesses, there are things that you could look at, such as having better freight rates to the BVI, which would cut down the cost, cut down the cost that you pay on freight, and subsequently would ease the burden in terms of the prices that you have to charge. There's also a very tricky one. I say tricky in the sense that it comes with a pro and a con, in that if you really want to really boost the hospitality industry, you can specifically look at custom duties easing those in relation to the hospitality industry in particular, if you wanted to really boost it. It could be for a period of a time, moratorium, or it can be even long-lived. The key to that, though, is if you're going to do it, obviously it's going to affect government revenues, and you're going to have to look at ensuring that you have proper mechanisms in government and personnel to collect the taxes that you would ordinarily would get on the back end of it. And you even have to look at things like audited books to ensure the integrity of the numbers. So those are the kind of ways that you can look at providing opportunity but still safeguarding the revenue base of the government.
Thank you. Mrs. Penn.
Thank you very much. There are many things that can be done and indeed should be done to improve the hospitality industry, and I'll be very quick on this. Many already exist, many of them need to be improved, and there should be new ones. One area I would mention immediately is marketing. I think that it is important that there is more assistance provided to providers in the hospitality business for marketing, be it in the charter yacht business, be it in the small inns and properties, be it in the hotels. Marketing is very important, and it is important that there is an avenue that is affordable and effective for providers in the hospitality industry. Custom duty exemption has already been mentioned, and that is an extremely important thing. And certainly, even in the times of recession, the present party, which is in power, has done a great deal by way of giving exemptions under the Pioneer Services Act, which gives a 10-year tax holiday, and also under the Encouragement of Industries Act. Players and providers in the hospitality sector also, in our view, need to be assisted. We fully support the idea of the Small Business Bureau and think that that should be activated and brought into reality. The players and providers also need business support. They need advice, they need guidance, they need support. Ways and means need to be provided to improve efficiency in the particular businesses. And certainly, I believe very strongly in this. The government believes very strongly in this, the ruling party. The development of the person, the development of the human being, people feeling that and being allowed to feel and empowered to feel that whatever sector of the hospitality business they are involved in, there is great worth in that, great value in that, a strong sense of pride. Because when people feel that, they act that. And they're all means, I think, of growing the hospitality industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Thank you. As my colleagues have said, there are many ways you can help the local businesses, particularly small businesses. And one of the areas that we were working on during my administration was the whole question of a hotel school where people could be trained in all aspects of the hotel industry. And we were particularly interested in this and continue to be interested in this, and we'll proceed with it. Because in order to help the small businesses in the territory, the small hotels, small properties. Again, we also have the small properties by reducing the number of rooms that are required for them to have hotel aid. Now, the other thing which are absolutely necessary to continue on that progress. One is about promotion. I mentioned promotion earlier, but this is absolutely essential. I think we missed the boat on promoting the territory a few years ago, and we have to pick it up and do what we have to do, because particularly small properties do not have the resources to promote themselves, and therefore as a government we have to take that responsibility on. One of the other important things is service. We have to improve the service we're offering to the people, our visitors. If we can offer them a good service, then they'll come back again. And that service can be promoted and developed through the same hotel school I mentioned earlier, where everybody who's working in industry, whether working in hotels or taxi drivers, etc., must be trained to provide good service for the visitors. As far as giving subsidies, one of the areas that we must look at is the question of electricity costs, fuel costs. This is a very high burden, especially for small businesses, small properties. And I think it is that the government should look at not just giving a reduced cost maybe for 1 month or 2 months, but look at some way to supplement the cost of electricity to, especially to small businesses, and in fact the whole population, because the cost of fuel is so expensive. Finally, the other thing I want to mention is we must make the visitor experience as good as possible, and that's the only way to get return business. And to make the visitor experience good as possible, I mean providing those services and having things for those visitors to do when they come here. Thank you.
Thank you. So. Thank you. Thank you. Again, if there's anything which arose directly from an answer, you please signal if you wish to address it. Honorable Penn.
Respond specifically on 2 points that my colleague to my immediate right, the Honorable Dr. Smith, raised. One is taxi, and he mentioned, but I will say the transportation sector. I think that is an extremely vital part of our tourism product and of the hospitality business, and we need to do everything to promote that sector of the business and of our economy. And I think it's been a very good thing that there's been the training that there has been in the last few years for persons in the taxi industry in relation to the history of the country, the historical sites, and so on. Also on the matter of subsidies, whether they be for electricity or whatever, for businesses in the hospitality sector, I simply wanted to say that I am strongly in support of that, as is the ruling party, and the record speaks to the fact that it was, I think, in December 2009 and again in 2010 that subsidies were given. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there Alan Wheatley?
Before back to what the Deputy Premier said in relation to 2 points, the 2 items she mentioned, which is pioneer status in the encouragement industry, which do exist and which do offer concessions in terms of the industry. But I'm being very specific in what it is I'm saying. I am not promoting something on a selective basis with a whole lot of bureaucracy which exists with those 2 particular acts in terms of their application, and it's subject to the discretion of the minister and a whole heap of issues and theatrics. What I'm interested in is, what I'm trying to say, and I'm being very clear on, is that this is going to be across the board. So if you're in the hospitality industry, whether you're in a hotel, whether you're a taxi man servicing or whatever, you look at those specific persons in the industry and you provide them whatever level of tax concessions necessary to ease the burden on them so that they can function better and transfer the savings across the board.
Thank you. Mr. Wheatley.
Just specifically in reference to the point about electricity subsidy, I think perhaps maybe the best subsidy we can give members of the hospitality industry and other residents and businesses out there is to remove the law that says that we have to buy electricity from the government and introduce alternative energy. And I know a lot of people within the hospitality industry and as well as residents would support that. Just that point.
Well, before I turn to you, Dr. Smith, I would just inform the panel that that's a substantive question that we want to address a little bit later on.
Okay.
Dr. Smith?
Yes. I just wanted to comment on the question about custom duties and giving some relief from custom duties. I think I've had discussions with many people, and that is something that seems to be that I'd like to see. And in particular, one of the things I'd like to mention is the question of reducing the custom duty on freight charges to the British Virgin Islands, because right now we pay the custom duties paid on the what they call the CIF value, that's cost insurance freight. If you remove the cost on the insurance and freight is a considerable cost. That will help to ease the burden to the purchasers from here, who also sell to the small businesses in the hotel industry.
We've talked a lot about how to increase government revenue, but in keeping with or consistent with the trends worldwide, the other side of that coin is how do we cut costs? increasing revenue and cutting costs is the new reality in tough economic times. And the question is, what will your party do to reduce the operational cost of government? That's part one of the question. And the other part is, what incentives would your party provide to create new opportunities in the private sector? I think we started with we'll start with Mr. Alan Wheatley this time. Sorry, Natalia Wheatley.
Okay. Well, it's a big question, and it's, I guess, something that's topical right now. I say we have to be more efficient. Of course, it's being bandied about that salaries, that's the biggest cost for government at the moment. I don't necessarily think that we need to cut, anyone has to lose their jobs, but I think we need to be more efficient and get value for money in terms of getting more work done in the same amount of time. And in terms of human resources, some departments are woefully understaffed. And so if we shift around people and we can get more value for money, that's good. Now, the people who need jobs right now can't expect that government will always have a job for them. So to the second part of your question, the private sector has to perform better. And as I said before, a number of the initiatives we already mentioned are supposed to help the private sector to perform better. I think we need to review some of the allowances and salaries. That we need to review those, because the legislators gave themselves a raise a few years ago. And I think perhaps to show an example to the community, that's not something that should have been done at that particular time. Perhaps maybe when the country was doing better, give everyone a raise, at that particular point. We looked at the cost of energy as well. I think energy is a huge cost. We're going to speak about alternative energy later. Alternative energy will help us. I think there's some means we can, in terms of using technology, in cutting down on some of the resources we use, modernize the public service through, a paperless public service, for instance, things of that nature. Things like vehicles and stuff like that, giving out vehicles and stuff like that. We need to review those type of things.
Thank you. Alan Wheatley.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think my, as he said, my cousin was on target in a number of these things. So I wouldn't really want to unduly reiterate those particular points, not to bore the audience. But there are some existing things with the government that really are not very effective. From my cost just review of how even the budgetary process is done now, there's a lot more that needs to be held accountable by heads of departments for how they're going to utilize the resources. And there was some previous mechanisms in place that I only want to get into right now. But there's some things that, if you go back a little bit in the old school, a little bit before my time and during my time, they might help cut some of the costs that the government now is dealing with. Past that, the government has to look at things like, put a moratorium on salaries and force heads of department to do things like job redesign. You have an existing post, people that don't have a lot to do, redesign the job and make them more effective. Natalia just mentioned things like automation. There are a lot of things like with workflow that is very prevalent all across the world now, where you can automate any process that you want in government, your travel requests, your application for loan forms, your work permit, anything you want. You could put it and you can walk it from your BlackBerry and tell where it is, whether the officer did it, didn't do it, redirect it. The government don't have these things. If you had a more automated system inside the government, you would need half the people you have inside there, because it's a far more efficient way to do it. Put in a carpool. You want a vehicle, go down by the carpool and justify why you need it. I see some luxury vehicles up and down, driving all over the place, park all over the place. I can't decipher what is going on with government, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheatley. Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me begin by going on record and clear record in stating that the Virgin Islands Party, which is the government in power at the moment, has done a great deal in very concerted attempts to cut down on government expenditure. And that was under great pressure and against strong odds. And many of the measures which the two speakers who spoke before me have mentioned are measures with which I agree, and they're measures that the government has sought to employ in policies which were implemented last year. They all are important, and all of them, I think, have a place. The emphasis has to be on getting more value for money and on cutting costs. And yes, the public sector has definitely operated at too high an expenditure compared to other sectors in the economy. And cutting the expenditures is being done and is a necessary and correct thing to do. In the area of, and we really need to improve our human capacity and get more bang for our buck, if I may use that expression. In the area of the incentives for the private sector, we certainly, as many of us have said earlier, and I believe we have all virtually agreed, and certainly it is the intention of my party, to do more to improve small businesses. It also is very important that we do more to promote the sole proprietorship, that independent man or woman who is rarely the traditional Virgin Islander, that independent man or woman who wants to set up in business on his or her own account. We need to do more to streamline the licensing procedures for such persons, the permitting processes for such persons, but the licensing and the permits and so on, it's necessary because we have to have a society of standards. We also, I think, need to consider flex time, and I'll stop there and hopefully have a further chance. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
We certainly do have a problem when it comes to expenditure in government, and we need to introduce more cost measures. I know that the previous government and those before have put some cost-cutting measures in, but we need to do much more. It is common knowledge that government spends too much money, and we need to cut the waste. And the saying is that any project the government does costs twice as much as it should cost. And this seems to happen too often. And so as a government, we have to look at ways and means to be able to manage projects more effectively so we can cut the cost and therefore have money to do other things. When it comes to working in the civil service, nobody is speaking about cutting the civil service at all. But what we need to look at is have a unit in the public service, what I call an industrial engineering unit. This body would go into various departments and look at how they function. Some departments may need more staff, and they'll be assigned. Others may need less staff. And by doing this, you'll be able to reassign staff so the whole government will be more functional. My colleague spoke about what I would call e-government. This is another area that is, he did not call it that, but e-government. This is another area that other countries have shown to be quite effective in cutting costs. As a matter of fact, in my own office now, I use very little paper. I do most of my work on computer. Another area that is important is duplication. We do have too much duplication in government, and we need to stop that and become more centralized in some things. When it comes to centralized of information, I visited other countries, for example, Cayman Islands, where they've got a centralized system, and all the departments can plug into that centralized system and get all the information they need. This is the sort of thing that we need to do in this territory. When it comes to incentives for the private sector, everybody's spoken about the need to have the Business Bureau up and running. I certainly do agree. But we also have to look at, apart from the customs duties on imported goods, we must look at the freights. We must have discussion with the freighters. We must also encourage our local business people in the freight service to get into more expanding the services so they can offer services from the mainland, maybe Miami, to the British Virgin Islands and other islands in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Mr. Maduro.
It's not maybe about it that government, has wasted and is wasting a lot of money. You don't have to look far to find that out. Look right across there, these things what they call greenhouses out there. Millions of dollars. That could have been saved. Imagine our government going to be giving the ministers cars costing over $80,000 and all these kind of things. They're burning gasoline like you drink water and things like this. All of these things, you know, government can save money on. Then there are the allowances that the elected members give themselves. You can't pay electricity bill, you can't pay a telephone bill, but they have telephone allowance. They have entertainment allowance whereby they can keep parties and invite who they want. As a matter of fact, I don't think some keep parties, they put the money in the bank for the saving. Then there's all kind of allowances that they give themselves. All these things can drop. And if they really be honest with the kind of economy we got now, some of them would be even thinking about cutting back their salaries. But instead of cutting back their salaries, they give themselves something like $2,000 a month to live in their own house. All this is unnecessary money. There's a lot of ways that government can cut down on spending unnecessary money. They're talking about giving incentives. How a broke government could give incentives? I mean, these are just things that are saying for election purposes. You know, we want to get to the core thing. The people want to know the truth so that they can come with the solutions to the problems. You see, one of the things that we know that government thrive on is imported duties. You know, I'll stop there.
You can finish your thought.
One of the revenue that government thrive on is from imported duties. So I don't think they can give away much of an incentive on that, more than trying to find out if they can't get these things imported in the country at a cheaper rate.
Thank you. Okay, switching gears. Quick rebuttals, 1 minute. You have the comment minute. It's comment minute. Yes, Mr. Wheatley.
Mr. Moderator, I promise not to do this too often, but the Honorable Dr. Smith made a point about e-commerce. And I looked at the 2010 budget, and I haven't been among budgets for a while, but I was really astonished to see we had like $275 million on average we spend in this, collecting in this country. $250 million of it is to deal with the current budget and $25 million for capital. $250 million is a lot of money for recurrent expenditure. Over $125 million of that is on salaries. I ain't getting the numbers wrong, but I ain't gonna go there yet. What I wanted to point out, you see that comment he made about e-commerce? We have to take technology very serious in this country if we're gonna put or get this country under control. We can't do it by not focusing on technology. If we don't do better than what we're doing down there with how we use technology in that government, it's gonna continue to spiral out of control.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Thank you. I just like to respond a little bit. I did speak about e-government, but following on what the member said, it is very important that we look at the way we spend money, how we budget, and how we account for the money in government. And I know that there was a plan on foot to introduce a different form of accounting system in the government, output budgeting, I think it is. And that is something that definitely will be taken up because I think it's important to have better control on the expenses of the government. I also like to say that speaking about expenses and allowances for members of the Legislative Council, I certainly would be one to review any allowance or to members of the Legislative Council or anywhere, if it is necessary when we are in office.
Honorable Deputy.
Thank you. I just want to say a few points in reply, well, not in reply, but in response to comments made by previous speakers. Very quickly, the matter of output budgeting is one to which the Virgin Islands Party is committed. It has not been proceeded with to its finality in the past 4 years simply because of the economic realities which ensued in the world. We also are very committed to rotation between the public sector and the private sector of public officers in an attempt to build capacity and also to help to grow the resources in the public sector in particular. There is also a decision made and in place to facilitate cross-government sharing of personnel. And I think I'll stop there and say that I too believe that we need to make a far fuller embrace of e-government and of technology as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Switching gears somewhat, this question concerns ports. The preface is that it's been suggested that the Terence B. Lettsome International Airport runway be expanded to accommodate direct international flights. Should this go into effect, it would take 3 to 4 years before it were to materialize. What would your party do in the interim to source airlift before the airport expansion begins? Who did I start with the last time? I started with that. So I start with Alan Wheatley on this question. Mr. Wheatley, what will you do in the interim to source airlift while we get a bigger airport?
Mr. Moderator, I see you left the hardest one for me. But
everyone has to answer it.
That's having some fun. So it's a good question. It's a difficult question, I'll be honest with you, because obviously to deal with airlift, as has been discussed in previous scenarios, really focus on getting an expanded runway capacity to be able to take bigger airplanes subject to mutual agreements and the like. I think one of the problems that we have right now is that we really need to sit down and have intelligent conversations with the substantive major carriers around the world. They obviously, for ease of convenience, go into St. Thomas, they go into Puerto Rico. They have commuter services. Nearly every one of them have them. And they fly into those places but don't come over to our end. Obviously, something is wrong in terms of the next leg from Puerto Rico here that we would need to sit down with them and find out why a United, a Delta, and the like don't have an active commuter service servicing the airport. That is, in my opinion, would be the easiest and quickest fix to the situation in terms of getting the airlift here. Other than that, we really need to now look at our local carriers, or we have a lot of pilots here, we have a lot of expertise in this industry. I've been having some discussions with one of the premier people or pioneering people in airlift here, and one of the problems he is telling me, well, actually he doesn't even have a legitimate reason why he can't get permission to fly into Puerto Rico, is just that the people in Puerto Rico under the FAA just can't conveniently sit and clear him. And that's a very simple thing. And one of the things I would like to do is fly over to Puerto Rico and find out who this FAA person is and find out why you can't just clear the man so he can fly over to San Juan and increase our airlift. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you. That's a very important question that has just been posed, Mr. Moderator. And I will begin by saying it's very complex. Certainly what my government would intend to do, and there have been statements in public to the effect that there is need for an airport extension, but holding the particular constituency that I do, my first step would be widespread public consultations to ascertain the public's view on this, and in particular, the views of the people who live in the East End, Long Loc area. I know that the common view is that there ought to be direct flights, but I would feel that there ought to be public consultation on it. It is also important, and again there's been talk about this from the government, about jets and the ability to improve the facilities for jets to fly directly into Beef Island, which is our main airport. We've made serious attempts with Virgin Gorda, and I myself remember traveling to Cape Cod to meet with the owners of Cape Heritage in relation to having airlift directly into Virgin Gorda. But there are many international aspects as well to this whole matter of what airlines, what flights can come in and what cannot. And we would certainly need to have very clear understandings and agreements in relation to ICAO and the various international organizations which have to do with airlift, licensing of aircraft, and so on. But it is a matter that I think needs far more study, far more discussion, and we have to be very careful that because it is a view expressed by some, that the government does not jump, whoever the government is, does not jump to a huge expense and cost which will be involved in extending the runway to provide more airlift, when in fact it may not necessarily be the optimum thing to do in terms of cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I certainly do believe that it would be necessary, as you pointed out, to extend the airport runway. But you did say it's going to take about 4 or 5 years, and what must be done in the meantime. And I do agree with my colleague that there should be public consultation about that expansion. In the meantime, however, it is necessary to get the visitors here. And there are several things, the options that can be taken. One is to seek discussion with carriers, maybe in the United States, who can have a plane that can fly right now direct from America, maybe Miami, to Beef Island. If you remember, we had a similar plane like that about in the 70s. I think it was a BAE 146. And they had to try to fly directly from Miami to the BVI. And that can be started again. There are several reasons why they failed, but we can get into that at another time. But that is one option. Until that can be sorted out, then the other option of getting passengers to the BVI is we've got to negotiate with the local ferry boat services. We've got to use the airport services in St. Thomas and negotiate with the ferry services to make sure that we have a regular service from St. Thomas to Tortola, whether it's Western or Rotong, regular and efficient, so that the passengers or customers won't be left waiting or stranded in St. Thomas. That's important. When it comes to Virgin Gorda, we all know that the airport shutdown caused some embarrassment to the tourism in that island. And we also know that Little Dick Bay, for example, 30% of their passengers came via the aircraft from Puerto Rico to Air Sunshine to Virgin Gorda. We then must look at other ways to get passengers to Virgin Gorda until that can be rectified, until the airport can be lengthened in Virgin Gorda, and that can be rectified. And one of the things which will be considered is to establish a ferry terminal at Trellis Bay. I think if once that is established, it will give the visitors a much more comfortable and convenient atmosphere with all the necessary facilities while they wait to board their ferry to Virgin Gorda.
Thank you. Mr. Maduro, what would you do to improve airlift in the interim? Yes. Let me just paraphrase it. The new airport, if one is to be built, would take 3 to 4 years. What would you do to improve airlift in the interim while we wait?
Well, Mr. Moderator, that's a very easy question to answer. If the airport, you can't use it, you don't have nowhere to bring in people by air, so you can't airlift people. The only way out is by the ferry boats. I don't see no other way out.
Sorry, maybe I should repeat the question in its entirety. For the benefit of all, it's been suggested that the Terrence B. Lettsome International Airport runway should be expanded to accommodate direct international flights. Should this go into effect, it would take 3 to 4 years before it materializes. what would your party do in the interim to source airlift before the expansion begins? How do we increase airlift before we get around to building, extending the runway?
Well, Mr. Moderator, let us look at this thing in the true way it is. But you say before the airport, what you will be bringing in people before the airport start construction to keep them here for, I don't understand what you're really getting at there.
Okay, it's a fair question. Maybe I'm not being clear. Assuming that we expand the runway, we're going to expand the runway. It's suggested that it's not going to happen for another 3 to 4 years. But how do you increase airlift into the BVI before we start that work? That's how I understand the question.
Mr. Moderator, it's the same thing, you know. It's the same thing. You only have one airport to bring the people in at the standard Beef Island Airport. You're going to extend it. What would you bring in prior to your begin your construction on the airport? It's going to be closed for 4 years or something until it's completed. So what you talk about airlifting people before you begin the runway? What you will be airlifting them in for?
Let me see if I can make my. No, let's not move on just yet. We're not going to start the expansion for another 3 or 4 years. So how do we get more people into the country before we start?
But people would be coming into the country unnecessarily, would they? Mr. I'm sorry to say, but I think, I don't want to be rude, but I think that should be taken off the books.
No, okay, I will pass on. It's a question that the chamber wanted the leaders to address, so I'm just a moderator. I have to ask that it be addressed. Mr. Natalia Wheatley, are you able to?
Absolutely. One thing about speaking last is, a lot of good points have already been made, and I really want to emphasize the point that Alan made, Alan Wheatley, a very good point, about our local carriers. We have right now Neville Bratwitt, who has a company called VI Airlink, or airline, and I'm surprised that he has not been given more support in terms of getting that airline up and going, because he actually is getting ready to receive a plane that has the capacity to carry 100 people and can land at Beef Island without expanding the airport. So it would seem to me that that would be a logical place that even now we should have been exploring. As Alan said, he has some challenges in getting into the American market, flying into America, but the American planes don't have any problem flying here. And so our legislators, our leaders, could go and speak with whatever authority there is in America, FA or whatever, just like when they flew up to England and they met with RC last year, a couple years ago. But they did not do that on behalf of our own local carriers, and I believe that when you go and you make those type of diplomatic overtures, that we should extend that to our local people as well. In terms of the cost of facilitating the airport expansion, which I agree with, I believe everything should be, the people should be consulted with, but I've heard overwhelming consensus in the community for extending the runway. And one way that, that I heard actually from the Chamber of Commerce in terms of how it could be financed is the cost from going from Miami to Puerto Rico would roughly be the same cost from Miami to Beef Island. Right now we're paying that extra cost between Beef Island and Puerto Rico, which it says roughly about $200. If we establish flights from Miami to Beef Island and add on that $200 cost per ticket, that $200 per cost could be used to help finance the airport expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Wheatley. First, question in response by Honorable Penn.
Thank you. My minute starts, and I would like to say that the present government has been entirely supportive of the local airlines and intends to remain so. In fact, the airline that was mentioned by Natalio is the first aircraft, as far as I'm aware, registered on the local register of aircraft. We also have passed a law to facilitate the registration of aircraft engines and the mortgaging of aircraft in an attempt not only to diversify the economy, but to help to promote the whole question of airlift in our country. I want to stress, though, that this whole matter is a matter very much tied into international agreements and international regulations. And there are factors that are beyond the control of any government. It's very easy when one is not inside of a government and having to deal with the day-to-day issues to have views, and it's important that one has views. But I know, for example, that matters like the age of pilots, for example, the currency of the qualifications of pilots and so on, all of those are factors that are very much in play. And finally, I just wanted to cite the fact that it is the ruling government, the ruling party, which in fact reopened at great expense in a recession the airport on Virgin Gorda, thereby creating a very important instrument, a very important way to improve airlift. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other response, Dr. Smith?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to add my voice to the support for our local airline pilots and companies, and particularly Mr. Bradley and his company, Clear Aero. And I have been working with him over the years to try to help them to get established so that they can fly into Puerto Rico, U.S. territories. It's taken some time because of all the regulations and the FAA and so about things which I have no control, but I do support them. And once they can have a plane, then there certainly will be an alternative, as well as the possibility of considering LIAT as an alternative to get passengers from Puerto Rico to Tortola. I'd also like to say about the Virgin Gorda Airport. While the airport has had some work done on it, it has not really been open to commercial flights. So flights like Air Sunshine, which carry the passengers to Little X-Bay, are not able to continue. It just takes small private flights.
Thank you. Mr. Natalio Wheatley.
Concerning the point about supporting local airlines, I'd also like to add that American Eagle wants to really pull out of this region, and we actually have to subsidize them millions upon millions of dollars for them to continue flying here. And I think that support for our local airlines should mean some form of subsidization at this particular point to get them off and running and get them profitable. That would be my view on that.
Thank you. Alan Wheatley.
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Well, let's say hypothetically there's some grave problem where the particular airline we're referring to, the local one, can't fly into the U.S. Then we have other options available. We can do a quasi venture with the same group or others affiliated with that group or a separate group, or we could formulate our own national airline. And you got to think outside the box here a minute. What's so difficult in forming a national? We got enough pilots around here doing all kind of odd jobs that could actually find something constructive to do. Plus, all the talk we're talking about funding it. Watch how much money the post office will pay to fly out the mail. Put that money in your own national airline and then subsidize clean. End of story. So recycle your own money right within your own economy with your own people. End of story.
Thank you. Just by way of information, we realize that we're running a little bit longer than we perhaps expected at this stage. So we've tried to focus on the most important issues and forego addressing some that, while interesting, perhaps aren't the most pressing at this time of year and in this forum. Here's one that's very focused and direct, and it'll be first addressed to Honorable Deputy Premier. Most people would agree, it's said, that creating a good experience for our visitors generates excellent return value. How does your party intend to provide a welcoming environment in the immediate vicinity of the cruise ship pier? You couldn't be more specific than that. Ms. Penn.
Thank you very much for that. That's a good question. We certainly, I think, need to improve the physical appearance in the area around the cruise ship pier. We also need to understand and recognize the fact that part of an experience for many tourists is shopping, buying souvenirs, having something to take home for friends, family, co-workers. And it is very important that steps are taken to make sure that the persons who make their living by selling in that area of the cruise ship pier are afforded proper opportunities to carry out their businesses, to provide the services that they provide, and at the same time provide the right atmosphere for those who come. So part of what is needed in that particular area, I believe, is a balancing of all of the interests, balancing in a fair and in an appropriate way. It is very important that as part of the experience that tourists have, that there are choices and that there are the variety of products available that the different individuals may want, different individuals may be interested in. And not only things to buy, but things to do. And it is important, I think, that we continue to foster the various types of activities that are offered at the cruise ship pier. The taxi drivers and the transportation sector provide what I observe as a very good and efficient service from that area. The training that I know the Tourist Board has been providing to them, I have had very good feedback on. And I believe that we need to continue the dialogue with all of the stakeholders in the area and do our best to make sure that there is a happy medium for all who use the area and that it is cleaner than it is and more appealing to the eye, as it were, while people are able to carry on their businesses and the tourists have things to do as they arrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Thank you. I certainly do believe that it's important that the visitor has the best experience possible when he comes to British Virgin Islands. And arriving at the cruise ship dock is not now the best experience. And so I do agree that we want to do what must be done to improve that. First of all, as my colleague pointed out, we have to improve the physical appearance. And that could be done in several ways. First of all, we could, for example, develop a shopping area, a shopping center in that area. And that's such as is done in other parts of the world, like in St. Thomas next door. That would assist with the entertainment of the visitors when they first come off the cruise ship, and also allow our local businesses to establish businesses in that area. Another thing that must be done is we should provide proper entertainment continue to provide proper entertainment and perhaps expand what is provided, especially cultural activities for the visitors in that area when they leave the ship. Again, giving them a great welcome. And building something like an amphitheater, for example, would be useful in that regard. When it comes to the vendors who are operating that area, they must also be taken care of. Everybody must make a living. There was a plan just before we left office several years ago to relocate them by building something that was tasteful, in an area not too far distant from where they are now. I think that plan could be looked at again. When I visit many other destinations like St. Martin, they've got areas where the vendors are located, which are very tastefully done, and the vendors are comfortably selling their wares to the visitors. Those are things which are necessary. And then in developing all this, I believe that it should be possible that there should be cooperation between the cruise ships, or the owners of the cruise ships, and the government in developing these facilities here at that area.
Thank you. Mr. Maduro?
First of all, when tourists come to your country, they want to learn as much as they could about your country, whether the culture, the history, and so on and like. So you need to meet them, for example, with little booklets of people explaining about the history of the country. For example, the history of the BVI is tied in with the history of the United States. The architect who designed the Capitol building for the United States was born in Little Jasmine Dyke, and a remnant of his home is there in Pleasant Valley. They would like to know things like these. They like to know, for example, about the first settlement or the first government was Sitagoan, I think, was located in Wajangada. The next was right here, not too far from us, and the ruin of the walls of the government house is up here, Hodges Creek. All these things, they would be interested in to know the history of your country. They like to know how you lived before. Like, for example, I was in the Isle of Man, and what they did, they have model of the different homes, how they used to live, what they had prior to their times. We mustn't be ashamed of the trash houses we had here. You could have them on display. We don't have to be ashamed of them, not that our dish was a calabash. Things like these would help bring the tourists back. They're interested in these things. But it looked like we all want to be on the cloud and scorn where we come from. So we can't get anywhere with the tourism if we don't expose ourselves to who we really are.
Yes, Mr. Natalio Wheatley.
Well, in the area of the cruise ship here, I believe it must be much more attractive. And even Road Town in general needs to be much more attractive for both residents and visitors. One thing we have to do is fix the infrastructure. We have the sewage, the stench of the sewage that's hitting you as soon as you come off the cruise ship. You also have the issue of traffic. You get a bunch of it's not attractive coming into a destination and then you're meeting traffic as though you're in New York City. So we need to improve the traffic through bus systems, through trolleys, taxis, and having well-placed turn-in lanes that could help, and a traffic engineer should be able to help with those type of things. Immediately leaving the cruise ship, we're proposing a visitor welcome center. I flew to Jamaica, and as soon as you get out of the airport, you have a local, like what we call a fungi band, but they have their local little folk music that will hit you as soon as you get off. We could have something like that within a visitor center that could even be somewhat of a cultural village. And more local crafts. We don't need any local crafts that's made in China, made in Indonesia, wherever else. Tourists want a unique experience when they come here. They don't want to feel like they're just going to some type of generic location. Within that visitor center, as was mentioned before, we could have shopping, we could have information for tourists who may just have questions, or we could direct them to the different types of tourism that we're promoting, whether cultural tourism, sports tourism, ecotourism, or whatever. Thanks.
Thank you. Alan Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to make a strange opening statement and say what I'm about to say. I really don't know how we're going to pay for it. But this is what I would like to propose. From a long time, when you look at a cruise, pier area there in Road Town. The area that I always envisaged that the cruise ship could mimic is beside Miami. If you sit and look at exactly where the cruise pier is, and you sit in beside Miami, you see the cruise ships right there. You can take your boardwalk from there, go right through, and they have a whole developed area. Miami arena where they play basketball. They have the little mini mall there. They have the open area where the bands play. They got all kind of food stalls, all sorts of stores, green areas. Even have a hotel, Miami Intercontinental on the end. Put all kind of concerts there. So when you talk about developing that immediate area, what I think really needs to be done there is something substantive. That when you come and you get off the boat and you wake up in the morning, you see something that looks like you're going somewhere. And from there, you know, you dispose accordingly in terms of the general aesthetics. I actually had a conversation with one of my constituents today. So I'm not taking credit for this at all. And by the way, this came from somebody in the 7th district. And the particular idea was to take where the festival ground is now and create a cultural village, a permanent cultural village that would be something, a tear down for the Polynesian center you have like in Hawaii, something along that line where you can put forward your cultural experiences and proceed from there. Those are the two things I'd like to mention in that regard.
Thank you. Anyone wish to respond to something specific?
Yes, I would very quickly wish to respond on the matter of the cultural village and history. I entirely agree with what the Honorable Conrad Maduro has said. And just to say that there is a citizen who, I won't call his name, but I have worked with him together with others, and there are plans quite advanced for him to offer a cultural village to be created in the area of the cruise ship dock. It's an absolutely important thing, I believe, and the government believes. And I didn't say this, but I believe it's very important, so I crave your indulgence to mention the matter of access and physical access at the cruise ship dock. Many elderly persons go on cruises. Many disabled people go on cruises, and I believe that part of what we ought to do, and it would also make us very compliant internationally, is to provide better physical access at the cruise ship dock for people with wheelchairs, people on various assisted means of movement. Thank you.